we are going to make an awesome shift dress, and the coolest thing about it is that it's only one pattern piece. Can you believe it? This here is going to turn into this right here. And this awesome one-piece pattern comes in sizes extra small through 6X. And because of the way we've designed it, this pattern is super easy for beginners. This is an all skill level pattern. And it has pockets. Check this out. Who doesn't love pockets in their dresses? I know I do. And if you are a beginner and you'd like to learn more, make sure you check out my online sewing classes. There's a link down below in the description. And also make sure you check out my sewing club, where you get a pattern every month along with the tutorials, and you get access to the private sewing Discord. Link down below for that too. In this video, you're gonna learn a lot about sewing curves, clipping curves, understitching, hemming, sewing these pockets, which are awesome, and facings and hems. So much to learn in this one-piece pattern. And you can download this pattern right now. The link is down below. So let's start sewing up this awesome shift dress. Today, I'm going to be using this really fun rayon linen print for my shift dress. I think it really has that 60s vibe to it. But you can sew this dress out of just about any fabric. You could use just like a plain quilting cotton. You could use a linen. You could use a denim. I mean, the options here are endless. You could go fancy and do a brocade. An eyelet fabric would be gorgeous for summer too. Or maybe you want to do satin. Satin could be a really fun choice as well, but a little bit more difficult to work with. So the sky is the limit for choosing your fabrics for this dress. So now that you have your pattern printed and your fabric selected, it's time to cut it out. Now this pattern is one piece. The facing, the pocket, everything is all in this one pattern. But we do need to cut it out twice, and we need to make sure we're cutting it on fold. And by on fold, I mean my layers are on top of each other, and I have a fold over here on the edge of the pattern. So that way when we cut it out and open it up, we'll have a full front or a full back. Okay, let's cut this out. Okay, so now I have one piece cut out, and I need to do the same thing one more time, so that way I have two pieces. So now you should have two pieces cut out that look exactly the same. That's what's so cool about this dress. We are all done cutting everything out. We only need those two pieces. Now let's get sewing. The first thing we're going to do is sew these two little ends together. So we're going to fold our dress in half, and we're going to sew together these two pieces here. And we're going to do that to both pieces. So I'm just using a straight stitch. Make sure you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other piece. So now that I have that center front and center back facing here sewn together, we're going to take these pieces, we're going to place them right on top of each other. And now what we're going to do is sew the ends together on these facing pieces. So my fabric lined up with the 1/2 inch, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end of this seam. And cut. Now I'm going to do the same thing to that other side. Now that we have both ends here sewn up at a 1/2 inch, we are going to pull them apart. And this raw edge here that goes all the way around in a circle, we need to finish it. So I'm going to be using the home sewing machine today. So either zigzag, overcast, or the overlock stitch on the home sewing machine are your choices. Or if you have a serger, you can just serge that edge as well. So I have my zigzag stitch set, and I'm going to go all the way around the bottom of this built-in facing. I'm lining up the raw edge of my fabric with the center of the foot, so that way the stitch is going on and off the fabric, binding that edge together. One tip for using a zigzag stitch is the thinner the fabric, the narrower the zigzag, and the thicker the fabric, the wider the zigzag you want. Backstitch when you get to where you started and cut. So you can see I have that bottom edge zigzag, so that way it won't fall apart any further through wash and wear. So now what you need to do is lay your pattern on top of the dress. Make sure you're lining up the bottom of the pocket here and the side seam, because we need to mark these 3 spots here. So the easiest way to do this is take an awl or a pin and poke a hole through the paper. And now take some chalk or one of your marking pens and put it through these little dots. And then you're going to have 3 dots there, and we're gonna do connect the dots with a ruler. So we got one line there, and then we're gonna do the other one over here. And you're gonna end up with that same mark that you have on your pattern. So basically what this is doing is telling us when we get up here to sew, we wanna keep sewing up until this point and then pivot and sew back down. This is going to give our pocket some depth so things don't fall out of your pocket. So this might look like a dart to you, but it's not. It's a sewing line to follow. So I have it all pinned up and I have my sewing line drawn on. Now it's time to sew that up, and I'm going to show you exactly how that sewing line works. Don't forget your seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, and make sure you backstitch at the beginning here. So first we have a nice straight line, so just work your way all the way down. Make sure you take out the pins before you get to them. It's always a good idea to engage your needle down button when you're sewing, so that way when you stop, your needle is going to be in the fabric. So now we're getting to our first corner. So you're going to sew down a 1/2 inch past it, leave your needle in, lift your foot up, and turn your fabric. Line it back up with your 1/2 inch and continue. When you get to this corner, come down a 1/2 inch away from the edge, needle in, foot up, and turn. And now we're working our way up to that line we drew on. So we're gonna follow that line that we drew. We're gonna sew all the way up to that point. We get up to that point, we're gonna leave our needle in, lift up our foot, and we're gonna turn our entire dress. And then we're going to continue sewing down the other side of that line. And now just continue all the way to the hem of your dress. Back stitch at the bottom and cut. And you're gonna do the same thing to the other side of the dress. Check it out, it's really coming together. Now what we're going to do is zigzag together the seam that we just created, because you can see your fabric's gonna wanna fray and fall apart, and we wanna prevent that from happening any further. So we're going to finish those edges. And then after that, we're going to open up the dress and we're going to finish the bottom of the hem. So we're starting right where you started sewing that seam before. Make sure you're not zigzagging together your armholes. Just start at the underarm and then work your way down. I have my zigzag stitch selected and I made it a little bit wider. I'm back stitching at the bottom and I'm just working my way through all of these edges. Back stitching at the end of this, and now I'm going to do the same thing to that other side seam. So I'm going to finish this edge here because this fabric is really starting to fall apart on me. It's a pretty loose weave. So I just want to finish that edge. Back stitch when you get back to where you started and cut. So you can see we have these edges here with the zigzag on them, and nothing is going to fray any further. And then the same thing with the hem, we have that nice zigzag down at the hem. Now here is where the magic really happens. We're going to take the dress and we're going to flip it right side out. And then what we're going to do is take that facing piece and we are going to make some magic happen here. It looks pretty crazy right now, right? But follow along closely because you are going to see how this built-in one-piece facing really works. So the way we're going to fold this is take that seam that's here on the facing and we're going to line it up with the side seam of the dress, right sides together. Make sure everything's nice and flat. If you haven't ironed anything yet, it's a great idea to iron your seams either open or to one side. So I'm going to start with pinning that underarm seam there. Now, once you have that established, you can go ahead and line up these curved pieces and pin them together. Now, you're going to notice that it's going to end at the top of the shoulder. It only goes so far, and that's how it's supposed to be. So go ahead and just pin up there to the top of the shoulder. And now same thing for the other side. Just keep working your way up to the top of the shoulder, keeping this nice and flat. Line up those edges. It's real important that those edges stay lined up and that they lay nice and flat. So we have one piece here pinned, and this here would be the armhole on one side. So now we have that one done. So now I'm gonna work my way over to the other armhole. So again, I'm going to take that seam on the facing and match it up with the side seam on the dress. And then I'm just gonna keep laying the fabric flat until I get all the way up to the shoulder. Now I'm gonna go up the other side. Now I have another armhole pinned. So for the front and the back curves here, we have nothing to line up and match necessarily. So you just need to make sure that you're lining up that seam with the center front of your dress. And if you don't know where that's at, fold your dress in half and find where the center front is and put a little mark there. Now we're just gonna line up these edges nice and smooth. If you end up with any big bumps or wrinkles right now while you're pinning, unpin it and get it to lay flat, because if you've got wrinkles now, you're gonna end up sewing those into it and it's not going to work out. And that is how you're going to pin the front and the back neck. Now we have everything pinned. So when we sew, we need to sew these neck shapes here, one for the front, one for the back. And then we have these armhole shapes here. They're also curves. So we're just sewing up to the top of this fold. We're not sewing across the fold. So we have one on this side, and then we also have one on that side. So we have 4 curved shapes to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm starting with one of my neck curves. Remember, your seam allowance on this is a 1/2 inch. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning. Back stitch at the end and do the same thing to the other neckline curve. So now I'm doing the armhole curve, making sure I back stitch in the beginning, working my way all the way around this curve, keeping everything nice and flat and using my 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you get to the end, back stitch and cut and do the same thing to your other curve. So now I have all of these curved edges here sewn together. And now that they're sewn together, because it is a curve and it's a 1/2 inch, we need to clip into it. So what we're going to do is take our scissors and we're gonna clip right to the stitch. Just make sure you don't go beyond it. And do this to all 4 curves. We're doing this to release the tension in the curve, so when we flip the wrong sides together, it's going to lay smoothly. Now that they're all clipped, we can take this facing and flip it, so that way it's going to be on the inside. So you want to take your shoulder straps and you're going to push them out. And if you can't get your fingers all the way in there, you can take your marking tool or a corner pusher and push it in there, so that way the corners of your dress are popping out. And we're going to do that to all 4 straps. Now I have my facing turned to the inside and I have all of my straps pushed out and I gave it a quick press. So now what we need to do is add an understitch on the facing. So when we do this, we're gonna make sure we're stitching only on the facing. So we're just gonna open this up and make sure that the seam allowance is pressed towards the facing. So that way we're stitching the seam allowance down to the facing. And this is gonna help keep it to the inside of the garment while you're wearing it. Now it's going to get pretty narrow up here in the strap, so you're only going to be able to do this up so far. So just go as far as you can and then stop and backstitch. So we're going to go from here all the way around and up to here. And we have 4 curves to do this too. So you're just going to understitch the curve and you're probably going to have to stay 2 or 3 inches away from the top of the strap. So let's go understitch those 4 curves, and then we are so close to being done. So I have my positioning set up, so I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, but on the facing. And you'll notice I'm about 3 inches away from the top of that strap. Make sure you're back stitching in the beginning, and then work your way all the way around the edge of this facing. And again, make sure you're stitching on top of your seam allowance. We're coming up to that other strap, and you're going to notice here that I can only sew so far. That's about as far as I can go. I'm going to add a few back stitches and cut. So your understitch should look something like that on your facing. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other 3 curves. So we have our understitch on the facing, and it's going to hold it down beautifully. We have it on all 4 curves. Now we need to do a few things to the facing to make sure it stays on the inside and that little flap of fabric doesn't want to pop out. So the first thing we're going to do is a stitch in the ditch on the side seam, holding down the facing, sewing through the self and the facing. Let me show you what I mean. So what we're going to do is take the facing, we're going to fold it to the inside of the dress, and we're going to line it up with the seam. Now what we're going to do is stitch right in the seam about 1 inch, making sure we back stitch at the beginning and the end. Let's go do it. So you're going to notice my needle is right in the seam. So go slow and just make sure it stays right in the seam. Add a few back stitches. And by keeping the stitch directly in the seam, it's going to look invisible. I like to pull my fabric apart so I can make sure I'm stitching right in the seam. I'm going to add a few more back stitches and cut. And you can see how nice and clean that looks, and it just hides right inside the seam. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side seam. So I have the side seams nice and secure and sewn down, but you're going to notice your front and your back facing want to flip up naturally. So you need to choose a way to make this stay down. Now you could put some double-sided fusible in here. You could hand sew down the facing on the inside using a very small fine blind hem stitch by hand. Or you could do just like one decorative stitch holding it down in the front. You could hand sew a button on the front, or you can actually stitch down the entire facing all the way around through the dress. You will see a stitch around the outside, but I know you've totally seen dresses like that before. It is a thing. So now you need to choose how you want the front of your facing to stay down, and then go ahead and do that. Now that we have the neck finished, it's time to move on to the pockets. And you're saying to yourself, didn't we already sew the pockets? Well, we did, but we're gonna add one extra detail to the pockets to make sure they stay nice and crisp. To do this, you want to iron the side seam nice and flat, right where the pocket opening is, and you're gonna end up with these really crisp edges right where that pocket opening is. And now what we're going to do is just add a little edge stitch on both sides, just making sure that that pocket stays in place. So I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Just going to sew to the bottom of that pocket opening, add a few back stitches, and cut. And now we're going to do the same thing to the other side of the pocket opening here. So I'm just going to flip the dress around. I'm going to start back here. Back stitch and cut. Now we need to do the other side of the dress. So now we need to sew together the strap. So the nice thing about this dress is that the edges are finished here on the strap, and you can choose how you want it to fit you, so you can really adjust it here with these straps. So what we're going to do is basically overlap them, and then we're going to sew them down. So try this on. Pin it on yourself where it feels comfortable on you. Make sure the armpit isn't too high or too low, or maybe you want it real low. Totally up to you. So go ahead and pin your straps where they're nice and comfortable on you. So I have this pinned at a good length for me, so I'm going to show you how to sew it. So what I like to do is put a little edge stitch on this side at the clean edge, and then flip it over to the inside and do the same thing. sew down this flap of the strap right at the edge there. Now, you could also put a button in a buttonhole here. You could sew a rectangle or a square. You could put some decorative stitches in here. You've got some different options for keeping these together. But to keep it clean and simple, I'm just going to be edge stitching these clean edges on both sides. So I'm edge stitching right where this shoulder strap is. Back stitching, and now I'm going to flip it over to the other side. And now I'm going to do this side. Back stitches at the end and cut. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other strap. Now the straps are all sewn down. It is time to hem the dress, and then we get to try it on. For the hem of this, I'm going to be roll hemming it. So I'm going to iron it up half and then another half, and then we're going to stitch right on the edge here, giving us a nice clean hem. If you want some tips and tricks for creating rolled hems, make sure you check out my video on that. And you don't just have to roll hem the bottom. You can do a single folded hem. You could use hem tape. You could bias bind it. You could do a bias bound single folded hem. You could blind hem it. You have so many options for hems here, but I'm going to be creating a rolled hem. Our one-piece shift dress is finished. Look at how good it looks. We didn't even use a serger, and it looks awesome. Let's go over the details. You learned all about the facing and the understitch, keeping down the facing, attaching the straps and adjusting them to your size, sewing lots of curves in the armholes and the neck. And then we can't forget our awesome side seam pockets with our little edge stitches there. And these pockets have so much room, definitely gonna fit your phone in there. Again, we have our nice smooth lines, the fabric drapes so nice down from the top. And then we have our gorgeous rolled hem here at the bottom. But again, you could have chosen a different hem for this. And here is our shift dress on. I just love it. It's easy to wear. It's comfortable. It's got these great, amazing pockets in it that you can keep all your doodads in. And best part, it was one pattern piece. Can you believe it? We made this dress from this pattern piece. Just one pattern piece cut twice. So cool, right? Don't forget, you can get the pattern on my website, sewinganastasia.com, under the digital downloads. And it comes in sizes extra small through 6X. This pattern is so great for beginners. If you are new to sewing, this dress is nice and simple for you. Or if you're more advanced, well, you're just gonna whip this dress out like no big deal, because it is so nice and easy to make. So if you find a fabric that you fall in love with and you wanna make a nice casual dress, this is a great pattern for it. And I do test all of my patterns on all the different sizes, and it looks great on everyone. So I know you're going to love it. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions on sewing together the Surefire shift dress, leave it down below in the comments and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. And if you enjoyed the video today, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you are already a subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. And don't forget to follow me on all the socials. That way we can stay connected and creative together. And if you're in Chicago, come on into the design studio and take some sewing classes with me here in person. And if you're not, that's okay. We now have online classes and we have the sewing club, which is so cool. You get a new pattern every month and you get access to our private sewing Discord. We're starting a whole sewing community over there. So make sure you check that out. Links for all of this are down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching today. Bye.